Living Corporate is brought to you by Doximity. Doximity helps over 2 million medical professionals. We are the largest medical network that includes over 80% of physicians and over 50% of physician assistants and nurse practitioners. We don't take that responsibility lightly and committed to working towards a more equitable world inside and beyond our virtual office walls. If you want to learn more about Doximity, check out your app store at DOXIMITY. That's DOXIMITY.
This is Including You, the new
What's
series
going
for
on,
lead
Living
at any
Corporate?
level.
It's Tristan, and I want to thank you for tapping back in with me as I provide some tips and advice for professionals.
Who are creating inclusive
Today, I
cultures
want to discuss
in their
job
organizations.
hopping.
Our goal is to show
Before we
what's
can talk
working in
about job
companies just
hopping,
like
we
yours,
need to set a
to
base
give you the
definition of what it
tools you
means.
need to keep pushing
By
for
most
progress in your
definitions,
own
job
workplace.
hopping is when a
We wanna
person spends
create
less than 2
belonging and
years in a
opportunity for
position and
everyone,
does that more than
including
once
you.
consecutively.
And now here's your
According
host,
to Robert
Amy
Half,
C. Waninger.
64% of employees favor job hopping, up 22% from 4 years ago. Studies show that millennials and
Welcome
Gen
back to
Zers are
Including
most
You.
likely
My
to
name is
job hop,
Amy C.
especially if they
Waninger. I'm
work
your
in
host.
tech,
I'm also
retail,
the
or
founder and
healthcare.
CEO of Lead
The
at
main
Any
reason
Level.
that most
My
employees
guest
job hop
today
is
is
due to
Vanessa
limited career
Nazario.
growth.
Vanessa is the
Under
corporate
half of the
director and
employees
chief
switch
diversity
jobs for
officer
more
of
money.
Memorial Healthcare System.
Now, a new study done
Memorial
by
is one of the
Skynova,
largest
an invoicing
not-for-profit
company,
healthcare systems
found that
in the
job
U.S.
hoppers receive a
It's based in South
23%
Florida
increase
and
in
employs
salary on average. But
14,000
workers who stayed with the
people.
same company
Vanessa,
for
welcome
3
to
to
the
8
show.
years made roughly
Good morning. Thank you so much for
$8,000
that warm
more annually
introduction.
compared to their job
I'm so
hopping
glad to have you
counterparts.
here. I am
You
curious,
also want to be
as I
cautious
am with
about
all of my
jobs that offer
guests, with
significantly more
14,000
money to do
employees,
similar work.
having
There's
a
the potential for
commitment
this to
to
be hazard
diversity and
pay due to how
inclusion
volatile the
is a
company or
big
position
commitment,
is.
right? Because you're
It is.
So you
talking
have to ask
about
yourself,
folks
is
from
job hopping
all
really
different
worth
kinds
it?
of
Well, it
professions and
depends
all
on the
different
reason
sorts
that you're
of roles,
leaving.
from
Do you
hourly
feel stagnant
people
at
to
work?
salaried,
If you can't see any
from
room for
people who
growth and
are
you've
in
had a
food
conversation
service
with
to
your
people
boss
who
or
are
HR about
doing
it, then
brain
it might be time to
surgery.
consider moving
And that's a
on.
big swath
How
of
engaged are you at work?
stakeholders and interests.
According to a Gallup
Why
poll, only
is diversity
36% of employees feel
and
engaged in their
inclusion
work and
such a
workplace.
priority
If work is
for
solely about
Memorial?
getting a
Oh,
paycheck for
thank you for
you,
that
then it
question. I
might be
think that's
time
a
for
good place
something
to
different.
start, right? Because at the end
Being
of the day, you
disengaged at
always have to go
work
back to the
significantly
why this
impacts your
matters
performance due to
for an
increased
organization,
stress
particularly in
levels and
healthcare. If
feelings
you
of
think about what we've
inadequacy.
been through over the last several years with the
Do you have a
pandemic,
terrible
I think
boss?
more than
I
ever,
get it.
we have to
We've
really
all
stay
heard the
laser
phrase,
focused
people
on
don't
creating
leave
an
jobs, they
environment
leave
where people can
managers.
bring their
There's
whole selves
also
to work,
research to
really
back
their
that up.
authentic
But
identities.
it's not
And
always
you
a
have to be
reason to
really
leave the
intentional
job.
about going to
If your
market
boss is
with
the issue,
strategies to
see if
make that
there's a
happen. I'm a
conversation
firm
you can
believer
have before
that you
jumping
can kind of
ship.
let it sort of
You want to make
try
sure
to
you
happen
leave the
organically,
job, not some
but what
extenuating
happens is
circumstance
sometimes
that
you
may
don't get it. So
change.
to us, in
Don't
terms
put
of
yourself in
building
a
a culture of
position to
inclusion
regret
and
your
having a
decision.
specific strategy
So,
was
is it
super
okay to
top of
job
mind
hop?
for us.
Absolutely.
Again,
You
and
just
the
want to
other
make
thing
sure
I'll
you
share
do it
with
for
you
the
that in
right
South
reasons.
Florida, we're
This
very
tip was
fortunate
brought
to
to you by
have a
Tristan
rich,
Layfield Resume
diverse
Consulting. Check us
marketplace,
out on
right? So we have
Instagram,
an
Twitter, and
abundance of
Facebook at
diversity
Layfield
within our
Resume,
own
or connect with
organization.
me,
So that's a
Tristan Layfield,
really
on
great place to
LinkedIn.
start with. But the area that, again, we have to be very intentional about is making sure that those individuals who come to us every single day for as part of their career and employment, the 14,000 employees, that they feel that sense of belonging. And that's the why for us, connecting it back to why should they show up each and every single day and really give 150% of themselves to this organization if they're not feeling respected, right, and treated with dignity. And for me as a leader in DEI was to make sure that we focused on that, because if you do that and you do it well, you get the best results from camaraderie among peers, right? How they show up in front of our diverse patients, maybe the ideas that come from having these diverse sort of individuals around a certain space. So there's just so many benefits to this. For this reason, right, and many others, was the why behind we want to do this. It's essential, it's integral to make us the best healthcare organization, not only in South Florida, but honestly, my aspirational goal is countrywide, that we're recognized as leaders in this space, because we've been so focused on really supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion from the ground up. And I guess for me, I would probably say I would see it successful when you hear employees show up, and it shows up in our employee engagement scores, when they themselves are talking it up and really being DEI champions. So for me, that's how I would know that we're trending in the right direction. But for us, inclusion was top of mind, and that's why we've been so laser focused on it. So thank you for that question. I think that's a question that, again, many DEI professionals have to start with, in terms of like, why does this even matter? How does this impact the business and us in healthcare? So thank you for that.
You bet. I want to pull on this thread a little bit about the constituency or the marketplace that you're serving, because when I work with hospitals, especially, I always think about when somebody walks through the door to be served at a hospital or to see a doctor, they are likely at the most vulnerable point they're going to be.
Absolutely.
And kind of once you walk through those doors, you have very little control, right? Because people are going to tell you what they're going to do. And you can say yes or no, but you don't really always understand what's going on. You don't always understand the impacts because we don't walk in with all that medical knowledge. And I would imagine that having a diverse and inclusive and authentic workforce in a hospital really changes the patient dynamic as well. The level of trust that people need to have to even walk through the doors is so high. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that translates into the services that you provide?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So obviously, when you always hear people say no one really wants to come to a hospital, right? It's not, oh, let's go to the hospital today. What a fun activity it is. So obviously, when they do come into our facilities, the expectation, I would hope that they hold us accountable for delivering the best care to them. The piece that we're trying to make sure that we weave into this whole conversation is that it's culturally competent, patient-centered care. That at the end of the day, understanding the diverse marketplace we're in again, that we understand our patients come from all walks of life, all different cultures, backgrounds, customs, religion, speak different languages. So for us to meet them where they're at and be in a place where we understand and appreciate that makes the world of a difference. What we've seen is that patients trust their providers when we take the opportunity to learn a little bit more about them. Yes, you want to treat whatever's happening and get them out of here as soon as possible. But if you're taking consideration, if they speak a different language, that you want to be able to make sure they have an interpreter, as an example, that the documents that they're reading is in their preferred language, that their provider maybe speaks their specific language or is cognizant of maybe something about their religion, that they abstain from certain foods. And for us to customize that experience, it's going to make the difference for us. That's what's going to make us, again, the best healthcare providers in South Florida market. And again, I think across the country in terms of being a best in class. So for me and for our organization, that's what we've been focused on. And that's the other piece of that question in terms of the why this matters for us. Because again, if you're meeting the patient when they're at, making sure that you take into account, again, their background, their customs, their culture, it's just going to feel as though we really do care, because we do. And a part of that in terms of how do we even get ready for that is on our side is raising our cultural awareness. So we focus a lot on educating our staff around all the different cultures we serve. And as a matter of fact, just yesterday for Pride Month, we had an amazing speaker that really took the opportunity to teach our caregivers around understanding how to create an affirming environment for the LGBTQ plus community, right? Raising our collective level of awareness, understanding why pronouns matter, preferred name, gender identity, all these things that we should know. Because if you're sitting in front of someone who identifies as transgender and they're saying, hey, please use my preferred pronouns, I would expect that our caregiver would understand the significance of that request. So for me and for us, that's what we're focused on. And that's what it makes a difference. And we could probably start to see the impact of this work when you look at our patient experience scores. And we see this back in our surveys when our patients are saying, hey, I'm going to select Memorial Healthcare System for my care, because they really do care about who I am as a person. I'm not just a number that comes in and I'm treated and released. They actually do care. And that goes back to that emotional sort of connection, that sense of belonging. And that's for me top of mind when it comes to seeing our patients who select us for their care, quite honestly. And it's a tremendous endeavor. It's not an easy one. I keep going back to what I said earlier. In South Florida, there's such rich diversity that we're not going to know every single thing about every single customer culture. But if we've raised our awareness in terms of at least understanding that, hey, this person might have a custom and practice that we need to be mindful of as we do their care plan, then we've elevated that conversation.
Absolutely. And I think from a patient perspective, having been in the hospital a few times, it's hard to trust that your care is going to be good or that it's going to be appropriate if your nurses, your doctors, even the people at registration, if they don't see you, how can they treat you?
Absolutely.
And if they don't see you, how will they treat you? And that's a big fear for a lot of patients, especially those that have been in the past excluded from, for example, medical trials, or who have been part of groups that have been mistreated by the medical industry or by the broader medical institution. There's a lot wrapped up in that for them. And when they walk in and they feel seen and they feel heard, some of those barriers come down and can lead to better outcomes.
Absolutely. It's you have to build a level of trust with your patients, right? They have to trust that you really have their best intentions top of mind, and we do. And I think again, when you inject sort of the diversity, equity, inclusion sort of conversation into this fold, it just elevates that whole experience for that individual. So taking the time to understand, again, someone's preferences and again, meeting people where they're at, it just makes the world of a difference. And I want them to walk away saying, wow, Memorial really got it right for me. And they go back home to their family and friends and say, hey, let me tell you about this experience at this hospital. They were considerate about the foods I consume, my religion, as an example, my language, and all that kind of stuff that really matters to people. Absolutely. And you have to build that trust factor and take the opportunity to understand where they're coming from and meet them where they're at.
You talked a little bit about building cultural competence within your organization. How are you doing that specifically? Is this through training and education? What are the media or delivery mechanisms that you're using to build that kind of competence? Because it's not a once and done, right? It's over time and it's just
Absolutely.
layers upon layers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. You have to use different modalities when you're teaching and really trying to inject this cultural awareness thinking among 14,000 individuals, right? So we're a large organization, so you cannot do a one webinar and expect like transformation to occur. You have to constantly build on sort of the content, the conversation. So we do webinars, we do in-persons, and the last 2 years, obviously, because of the pandemic, we had to hold back on the in-person. So we've transitioned to virtual. However, the aspirational goal is to get back to those in-person conversations. I will share though, that even with our leadership, we do have a forum, a leadership forum that occurs quarterly, and we've injected conversations around unconscious bias as an example, and different topics and themes that connect back to the DEI conversation to make sure that, again, that as leaders, they're walking away with something new in terms of learn around this and that they take it back to their staff. And so we're testing different models in terms of how we go to market, because again, it gets a little hectic, as you can imagine, because patients are first and foremost. And when you have clinicians who are on units, you can't pull them off the floor for 3 hours. So we do in-services where the nurses, for example, will huddle for 20 minutes and we'll pick one topic, microaggressions, let's say, as an example, and we'll talk about microaggressions, how they might show up, and leave them with some resources that then they can read and digest after that conversation. So we have to be really creative, but we've tested out the in-person, the virtual webinars. We've also looking at doing some more lunch and learns as an example. We do send out email communications every single month, but specifically if we're celebrating a national sort of cultural holiday. So for Black History, through my office, the DEI office, I put together really thoughtful communication to raise our level of awareness around the importance of that particular historical month. What are the things that we need to know and learn about? So that's the other way, is sending information electronically. We really try to figure out what are the best modalities to get this information out there. And that way, again, people can start to absorb. However, to your earlier point, it can't be a one and done, right? So I talked about Pride Month and the conversation we had with our staff. Now, what happens next is an additional session that we can now put in our e-learning platform and push out to them so that way they can enroll and complete an additional sort of a session around this conversation to continue to build on what they were exposed to as part of sort of their introduction, if you will, during the dialogue on Pride Month. So you have to really think about how to get it to market within healthcare, because it's a little different. Like I mentioned, we're in a very unique sort of situation where we just can't pull people off units and floor. Doctors are treating patients or clinicians, even our environmental services, they're making sure rooms are sanitized and safe. And so you have to think about, how do I get this information out there? So we're very fortunate that we have different modalities that we can to bring them the information. And it's been pretty successful. It's been pretty successful. And I do receive emails back from staff who participate in these sessions. And many of them are like, wow, I had no idea about fill in the blank. And it's remarkable and it's amazing. It's exactly what I'm looking for, that people say, wow, I had no idea, but now I know. Now I'll understand a little bit more if I have a patient from fill in the blank from this country, or someone who's LGBTQ plus. And that to me, it might seem so small and minute in terms of the learn, But again, if you continue to build the impact, you'll feel it eventually, again, when it shows up and how they show up in front of that patient for us.
So much of this is just about challenging one's own assumptions, right?
Yep.
That we all go about the world as if our worldview is truth and is fixed and is objective. And when you can start to introduce different lenses onto reality, when you can start to interject and interrupt those patterns, then people can start to see them on their own. It's almost like a muscle memory that comes to them when they say, oh, I wonder what I'm assuming about this person, or what I'm
Right.
assuming about this situation, or did I hear this the way they intended it? And just breaking down those barriers bit by bit can make a huge difference.
Oh my gosh, it absolutely can. Just going back to, and I keep referencing this pride conversation we had only because it was just yesterday, so it's top of mind. But one question, for example, from one of our clinicians to the speaker, a phenomenal speaker from the Pride Center, she asked, how do I make sure that if someone I've never met, as an example, a patient, that I'm not addressing them inappropriately, misgendering them, for example, and I want to use the right pronouns. How do I even broach that conversation without messing up, so to speak? And we were able to address that question specifically about how do you do that? And maybe you start with just introducing yourself. My name is Vanessa Nazario. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And all of a sudden it sets the stage for, wow, okay, now I see where this person's coming from. And then you can engage with that other person. Even just asking those questions and raising the level of awareness there, they'll take that back to the hospital and then they'll share it with their staff and say, hey, let's start introducing ourselves to our patients and then asking for how do they wish to be addressed and what are your pronouns. So again, when you talk about impact and how you see how learnings are really being grasped onto by our staff, it's remarkable. It's phenomenal. And that's why I totally believe, and I'm a big firm believer that this education, it works. You just have to constantly, again, be at it and not have it be a one-time conversation and not really revisit it again, because then it's out of sight, out of mind in many cases. And that way it's people lose sight of, again, what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and I want to touch on this too, because it occurs to me as you're talking about all these things that you're doing, that your hospital system, you've been dealing with COVID for the last 2+ years, and 2.5 years now at the time of this recording. And you've kept this work going despite, or perhaps because of, or especially because of, all of the pressures on your staff. And so many hospitals, especially right now, are dealing with burnout from doctors and nurses and support staff. They're dealing with people, really high turnover. They're dealing with overwork, just fatigue around compassion and empathy. And there's really some trauma going on within the hospital staff as well with what you've been through. And I'm curious because I've heard people say, we can't start that until we're through this. What would you say to the hospital systems or to the companies that say, look, we got to get through COVID first, then we can address this?
I would say don't delay. You can absolutely do it. I'll share that I actually started my journey with Memorial in January of 2021. So it was the second year of COVID. And to start a DEI strategy from the ground and on the onset, it might feel a little daunting. Can I even do this? But then you fast forward and here it is a year and a half into it. And what we've been able to accomplish in just a year and a half in terms of acceptance, what we're trying to do has been nothing but short of remarkable. We've been able to launch new education programs. We've signed the CEO Action Diversity and Inclusion Pledge, which is a national pledge, American Hospital Association 123 for Equity Pledge. We kickstarted our Physician Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council to talk about how do we bring an equitable lens to the physician community, right, and our stakeholders there. We've done so many remarkable things. We've launched our curriculum around understanding different cultures and backgrounds. And to be honest, the feedback I've received from staff has been, you know what, this is something that we needed, because when you're only hear about COVID and COVID, to see something different that's exciting, right? That's going to help us be better professionals, to build a culture of inclusion and get people excited about coming to work each and every single day because we're honoring their identities and who they are. It's exactly what was needed. It was like a blessing for us to be able to launch this. And I think you could put 100 excuses in terms of why you can't get it done, but we did it. And as a matter of fact, we've been invited to speak at national forums about the work we're doing at Memorial relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the word is getting out about what we're doing here, which is remarkable. And maybe that sounds a little boastful, but that's okay. I think we've earned it. And I would say at the end of the day, Amy, it takes an entire team and village to bring this to life. And it starts with our CEO, Aurelio Fernandez, who, again, because of his leadership and his vision, for us to embark on this journey. My leader, Margie Vargas, who's CHRO of our organization, she and her vision to make sure we were able to get this done, and all the support in terms of resources, that is what has made it so successful for us. And I can only imagine that we'll continue to build on this great momentum and making things really happen. Just in 1 year, we were able to introduce new policies, a gender transition policy, to make sure, again, that our colleagues who identify as transgender, that we're creating an environment, a space for them to feel safe and comfortable as they transition. We've done certain things around patient populations and making sure, again, that we're looking at our policies or procedures. Does it read from an equity perspective and an equity lens? Is there bias or comments within that policy? So we've done those reviews. So there's so much you can do. I think people think that you have to have in-person everything and what have you to be DI, but there's so much more that you can do in terms of the internal infrastructure just to move this thing forward. And that's what we focused on the first year and a half. So is it feasible? Absolutely. Proof in the pudding that you can actually do it. And again, I invite anyone who wants to reach out to me to ask about how we've done this. I'm an open book. I'm an open book, and I do speak to other chief diversity officers and other diversity professionals about this work. And hopefully through this podcast, they'll be able to also glean some of the information that I'm sharing, and hopefully get them excited about continuing their work, regardless of what's happening. Pandemic, there's just so many things. There's always going to be something. Let me put it that way. There's always going to be something. However, if you stay really laser focused and really surgical about your approach, you can get it done.
Absolutely. And I think so many people need to hear that. There's always a reason not to do the right thing. And if you're committed to doing the right thing, you're going to get it done anyway.
Absolutely. You have to come from a good place, right? If you're coming from a good place with really good intentions, I think and that's where we started the conversation about being very intentional about the approach. And we have been really intentional, very thoughtful about it. And that's why I do believe we've had the success we've had in a short amount of time, given the backdrop of a pandemic and everything that's going on. I think for staff specifically, again, it's been a welcome sort of change in terms of the conversation, and to hear about different cultures and their cultures being celebrated, whether it's Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride Month. And so all of a sudden, wow, this organization, like, they actually care about me and my culture. I feel seen and heard, which, by the way, I've had employees say that to me. I feel seen and heard. How powerful is that? How powerful is that for an employee to say that? And you think about their headspace coming into this organization each and every single day, bringing their true selves to work, and how that shows up in terms of in front of our patients, with their colleagues. It's impactful work. It really is. So you can get it done.
Absolutely. Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, for your openness, and for your time today. I really appreciate hearing about what Memorial is doing and how you're driving this in your organization. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm glad that I was able to share. And again, if anyone who's listening to this wants to reach out to me, I do make my information available. And it's a journey for all of us. It really is. And listen, are we going to get it right all the time? Absolutely not. But we learn from our mistakes. We continue to grow, right, and move forward. And when you have the right resources, leadership commitment, and the right people around the table supporting this, your internal stakeholders, you will be successful and you can do it. So thank you again for the opportunity to have this conversation. It was great.
If you've enjoyed this episode, follow Lead at Any Level on LinkedIn and YouTube. Then join us for Including You video simulcast every Thursday at noon Eastern. Including You can also be enjoyed each week as part of the Living Corporate audio podcast series, available on all major podcast platforms. Learn more at living-corporate.com. Including You is brought to you in part by Lead at Any Level, a boutique training and consulting firm improving employee engagement and retention for companies that promote from within. Lead at Any Level. Leaders can be anywhere and should be everywhere. Learn more at leadatanylevel.com. Lead at Any Level and its logo are registered trademarks of Lead at Any Level LLC. The views and opinions of guests on our show do not necessarily reflect the positions of Lead at Any Level, Living Corporate, or the sponsors of Including You.
That's it for this week's episode of Including You. Join me next week when my guest will be Shakima Jackson Martinez from Answer Lab. We'll be talking about talent acquisition.
This episode of Living Corporate is brought to you by Blind. Blind is a trusted community of more than 5 million verified professionals, from startups to some of the largest companies in the world like Amazon, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Goldman Sachs, Google, JP Morgan, Meta, and more. Blind's mission of transparency seeks to break down professional barriers and silos at work so that you can make productive change and advance your career. It's a safe space to ask questions and get the real-time insights and perspectives from people who know what you've been through. On Blind, you can connect and have honest discussions about everything from compensation, company culture, performance reviews, promotions, and more. You can also join your exclusive private company channel to chat with your coworkers about company policies and what's really going on at work. And because it's anonymous, you can be honest and trust what you read on Blind. Download and install Blind from the App Store or visit teamblind.com to get access to the latest salary, company reviews, and interview experiences thousands of companies worldwide.